So apparently we have some things that we need to talk about regarding the death of Slim Shady, because I found this thread on Twitter where somebody is breaking it down in reverse and saying that that is actually the way that you're meant to listen to it. Now, I'm going to put a link down below in the description to show him some love, and you guys can check it out yourself. But I wanted to read through it, and I saw that my man Crypt actually just put out a video. I skimmed through his. It seems like he's buying into the reverse theory, and I'm going to be honest with you, I'm not completely sold yet. So I think it makes sense, and there is a chance that it's meant to be both ways, and that would be genius, and I want it to be that way. But when I read this, and I think about the album, and I go and I look at some things, I feel like there's some holes that don't make sense, and they're pretty big ones, at least in my opinion. Now, maybe you guys can fill those holes, and you can prove to me that I am wrong, and this is actually the way that we're meant to watch it, or listen to it, watch it, listen. It could be whatever you want it to be. But until M actually comes out and says something, we're all just speculating, throwing some theories around, and just having fun with it, which I love to do this kind of stuff. So I'm going to switch over to a smaller screen, and then we're going to go through, read this, and I will give you guys my reasons at the end as to why I think that there's some holes in this and I don't feel like it completely holds up. So he starts off with Somebody Save Me, which is the track with Jelly Roll, foreshadowing Marshall's death. The entire song is basically, if he never stopped doing drugs, where would he be now? And it was a beautiful song. Absolutely loved it. Probably one of my favorites off of it. The next was the Guess Who's Back skit, which I think is the Ken Kniff skit, foreshadowing the return of Slim Shady. And then Toby, Sometimes Shit Does Not Pan Out, Shady Shadow shows up, which at the end, isn't it kind of Slim Shady murdering Marshall Mathers with the chainsaw, if I'm not mistaken? After that, he goes into Bad One. He says, 1 minute you're here, the next you're gone. It seems like Marsh's job is done. He pulled off his stunt. So he's utilizing lyrics from some of these songs to point out why this is the direction that the story actually goes in. Then you have Temporary, which is his letter to Haley, which almost made me cry. Like the tears were coming. They just didn't drop, but they were there. And he says hint at the end of this, which I believe is because at the end of this, he alludes to Slim Shady killing Marshall Mathers, but it kind of happens that way in the right order. And we'll jump back into that as we go through the rest of this. But right now, let me just continue to read through what he has. After that, we have Head Honcho, which is the song with Easy Mill. Writing is on the Wall, Ezekiel, the story of Ezekiel. Now, obviously, that's Easy Mill's name, but that would be a dope play if this is actually how he meant it. In remembrance on Creation Day, Marshall's Creation Day would be Slim Shady. You'll be a stand till I die, which was a really dope bar. Then we go into GC2. Guilty Conscience 2 was like the culmination. Whether you think it went front to back or back to front, this is the track where everything kind of comes together and they actually have that face-off, which I think is extremely dope. But he says Slim Shady laughs after Paul hangs up on him, showing it wasn't a dream. Now, I'm not going to go too far into that right now because I want to talk about that more when I come back to poke some holes into it, but I do feel like that also alludes to something else. Then he goes into breaking news. Slim Shady is showing Marshall all the shit he has just started. Slim Shady laughs viciously at the end. Houdini, Paul calls back and says good luck. This is his rebuttal to Marshall, calling him, and he thinks that Marshall is effing with him because he's on this tangent again. What you thought you saw ain't what you saw. This will come back into play later. Then he goes into road rage and says Slim dyes Marshall's hair blonde again, hence Marshall rapping like a blonde hair version of himself the rest of the way. Which I do think that does make some sense. It does make some sense. Like a lot of the things that this guy says, I think are on point, and it leads me to believe that there is a chance that this album was meant to be listened to both ways, and you can kind of play with the story either way that you go. Now, after that, we have Fuel, which is probably my favorite song off of the album. It's really amazing. It's hard because Antichrist is dope, Lucifer was fire, Evil was fire. Like, there was a lot of good shit off this. But anyways, that's not really what this video is about. He says, the Reapers come into Heathen, and I need it from me. I don't remember that bar, but I'm just going through reading what he's saying. Antichrist, Cobain put the gauge to his brain. I'm going out with a bang A, Marshall's voice. And then Lucifer, switching between Marsh and Slim. First, I must weave rhymes. Then I'm going to leave eyes in a state of disbelief, a setup for the finale of this all. Then he says it starts to get really good. On All You Got, Slim is telling Marshall he ain't shit without him. Notice Marshall's weariness and tone. At this point, Slim is completely taken over, hence the opening of Evil. I do feel like he makes a really good point at that part, because if you do listen back to it, it does seem like he's a little bit weary, but I also feel like there's other ways of looking at that, which again, we'll revisit here in a minute. On Evil, he says, woke up with an attitude today, not in the mood to play, stuck in my ruthless ways, I refuse to change, nothing to lose or gain, guess I just choose to stay. Big foreshadow. Then we have Brand New Dance, which I'm going to get some hate for because I think that is by far the worst song on this album. The shock factor is funny. The song is absolute ass cheeks. I'm sorry. Somebody had to say it. I'm going to be the one to say it. Regardless, he says Shady just said he's so evil, so he's going to show it by making a whole song shitting on Reeves. Now, obviously, for anybody that doesn't know, that song was meant to come out back in like 2004. but Reeves had passed away, so they scrapped it, and then he put it out on this, which is why it does give you that encore sound. And I didn't really like that album, so that's probably why I'm not a big fan of it. Either way, we go into the Trouble skit. All right, here, drink this, drink it, bitch. He just drugged Marshall. Let me go, you bitch. Marshall says as he's tied up. Then Shady says, little pussy, what's wrong? Thought you were dreaming, huh? Bingo. So he feels like that is the big moment, right? Because he tells Paul about the dream at the end of GC2. And so now he's saying that this is Slim saying, oh, you thought you were dreaming. And that is probably his strongest argument that reverses the way to listen to this. I will give him that. That is probably by far the strongest argument because that is kind of dope. I'm not going to lie to you. Then he goes into habits. You can hear Marshall struggling as he's tied up and gagged. Slim is telling him to eat a pillow of some sort to knock him out. And then in Renaissance, he says that Slim buries Marshall, spits on his grave. Slim proceeds to spit his first song without the person that started it all for him, Marshall Mathers, straight vintage, Slim Shady on the track, teasing what's about to be unleashed on the world with side B. Now, I'm really hoping we get a side B. I have all the hope in the world that happens because I would love to listen to more. I feel like this went by so quick. Like, I enjoyed listening to all of it, and I'm going to listen to it a lot more. But once it was over and there was no more new songs, it's just kind of like, you know what I mean? Like, I feel like you guys probably understand where I'm coming from. So now I'm going to give you my opinion of why I think that it's meant to be listened to front to back and not in reverse like a lot of people are saying now. As far as the call between him and Paul, I feel like it makes more sense in the proper order than going backwards because it just doesn't make sense to me that he's going to tell Paul about the dream. He's going to tell him to F off and then call him later just to say more shit to him. And that's like his response to M calling him in the first place. To me, it makes more sense that Paul actually yelled at him at the beginning of Houdini and how he heard the album, he was upset and said he's on his own. And then when M calls him later on, that's why his response is F you or whatever it was he said exactly, and then just hanging up the phone. To me, that would make more sense. That's how a normal interaction would go, right? Like somebody tells you you're on your own and then you try to reach out to them and they just blow you off. So I feel like it makes more sense in the proper order. Not only that, but I also feel like if you listen to what he says in the Guilty Conscience 2 call,
it was like the old me came back on the new me and took over my brain and had me saying all this up shit.
He's revisiting all of the stuff that happened throughout the album up until that point, how he had this Slim Shady in his head and it made him say all these horrible things that we had been hearing song for song. And then it culminated in Guilty Conscience 2. And so he was telling him all the stuff that had happened instead of us hearing him say it all and then we get to experience it afterwards, which is possible. That's 100% possible. Some movies do it like that, but it just makes more sense to me that we heard it all and then he's explaining himself and saying, oh my God, I can't believe you've no idea this dream I just had, which was all the tracks that we just listened to up until that point. Now, the one song that I feel like is a little bit weirdly placed, regardless if you go front to back or back to front, is Houdini. Because in Houdini is really when Slim Shady steps back through the portal and merges with Marshall. And it happens at a weird point for both ways, whether you're looking at it from back to front, front to back, like it's just at a weird spot. So for me, when I think of it from front to back, I assume that Houdini is almost like a flashback. Like we've been experiencing everything that's been happening. And then in Houdini, it's almost like a flashback to him coming over and merging with him, telling us that that's why we've been hearing everything we've been hearing so far. And then eventually it culminates into Guilty Conscience 2, which for me would make sense because then Guilty Conscience 2 is the next actual song on the album after the skit. Now, as far as his point that Slim Shady seems to have taken over after a certain point, and that's why you're hearing him more and more in the beginning songs, and he feels like in reverse that makes sense. It does, but I also feel like him coming back, you can look at it as if he kind of has control initially, and that's why you get Renaissance, that's why you get Habits and the struggling and all of that, but then as it goes on, it becomes more and more Marshall, and then after Guilty Conscience 2, it's pretty much all Marshall, and the reason why is because he was having the fight in his head, trying to take back over from Slim Shady. Now, all that aside, if you look at the timeline of the tracks, you have Toby that comes up near the end, and it's Slim Shady using the chainsaw on Marshall. So I don't disagree that Slim Shady actually kills Marshall. I just don't think that it's in reverse. I think it's the normal way that you listen to it. Because then after that, you have the Guess Who's Back skit and Somebody Save Me. And then I saw this on Twitter, and it said missing Slim Shady and had a phone number on it. And this is what happened when they called it.
Hi, it's Steve Berman from the office. Apparently, Slim Shady has gone missing. Do I really care? If you happen to find him, do me a favor. Tell him to stay lost. What am I doing this for? Your call won't be returned because I really don't care if you find him or not. Now leave me alone.
So even though I don't necessarily agree with the reverse order, but I'm a little bit on board. I won't lie and say I'm not at all. It's just I think that it makes more sense from beginning to end And I think that it still ends with Slim Shady killing Marshall, and I think it still leads to the potential for there being another album or a side B where it's going to be all Slim Shady. I think another point that I forgot aside from that was that in Habits, he ties up Marshall, and in Guilty Conscience 2, he unties him and lets him go, which is why Marshall's able to take over and ends up killing Slim, at least in his dream. But it didn't really happen, which is why in Toby, Slim comes out and he ends Marshall. So for me, it makes more sense from front to back. But I'm down for anybody to prove me wrong. Like, I'm totally okay with you guys explaining it to me in different ways, adding more context, because I'm open to changing my mind. I'm not here to say that you guys are wrong, this is crazy, who would think that? That's not my opinion at all. I think this is just fun to have a conversation around, and I want to play the devil's advocate to what I see a lot of people saying, because I want to see more of your guys' context or more of your explanations and prove some of my points wrong, because I feel like my points are valid, but I might just, maybe I'm not seeing everything. So this is where you guys comment down below. Let me know what you guys think. Hopefully this video is functional. I kind of just winged it. I don't really like prepare tracks, and like I didn't go through and look at everything here and like come up with all these different ideas. It's just a few things that I thought of it when I was reading through it, and I wanted to share it with you guys and see what you guys thought. So I guess we'll go from here, and if more stuff comes out, we can make another video about it. But I appreciate you guys. Hope you guys are enjoying the album. I'll catch you in the next one, homies.